Thank you, Rohit. Next session is titled as Conversation Session, The Life and Works of Professor Surinder Singh Jodhka. So first I would like to invite Professor Jodhka to come to dais, and we also have two scholars. I invite Professor Aparna Vaidik, Faculty in History Department, Ashoka University, to come to dais. I also invite Dr. Satendra Kumar, who is a researcher at University of Zurich. I invite Dr. Satendra also to come to us. Over to you.
Welcome everyone. Satendra and I thought we would structure the session by asking Professor Jodhka some questions about his life and his work. And अगर आप लोगों की आज्ञा हो तो थोड़ा हिंदी भी मिक्स कर दें, because Jodhka साहब goes out and speaks in Hindi and Punjabi both lectures. So as everybody is starting with their loving anecdotes regarding him, I would also like to begin with one. मेरी जो यहाँ उपस्थिति है सिर्फ स्कॉलर की तरह नहीं है, हम जोधका साहब के घर वाले हैं। हाँ, उसके बिना कोई भी रिटायरमेंट की पार्टी उसके बिना वो नहीं होती है। My presence in his life allows him to practice nepotism. So you understand that. Now my presence is a nepotistic presence today. And I got introduced to his work about 6-7 years back. Being a historian, I hadn't paid attention. But when I did find it, it immediately made its way to my syllabus. And since then there has been a sort of a familial and academic engagement with him. तो पहला सवाल मेरा इनसे जो मैं पूछने वाली हूँ उसके लिए थोड़ा सा बैकग्राउंड आप लोगों को देती हूँ, which you may not know about him. So Surinder comes from a partition family. Yeah, you know. You must have talked about it in class. So I thought my pearls of wisdom आपको एक कोई नई information देने वाली थी, but it's not as new. So a sort of a story which sometimes may not always find place in writing of sociology as much as does for historians. Yeah, our location as many historians initially post-partition, so partition unki impacted their scholarship a lot. So his family moved from Pakistan, what is now Pakistan, to Panipat. So हमने पहला सवाल सोचा था कि रूरल पंजाब के बारे में, इनके बचपन के बारे में पूछें कि how growing up in that area impacted his life. But I also felt a very big influence. What did being a migrant, is that a correct characterization? Being a refugee, sorry, not a migrant. What did being a refugee, growing up as a refugee in Panipat, did it ever impact his scholarship? Did it impact the way you are? I'm sure it's made you, and he's also the youngest child in his family. So, birth order, what did his birth order do for him? Yeah, do you want to go with this one?
Should we begin with my notion of Gupshup? Because Gupshup allows you to move away from the question that has been asked. मैं आऊँगा उस सवाल पे, मैं जवाब उसको टालूंगा नहीं, उस पर ऑलरेडी कल बात होनी शुरू हो चुकी है। तो मेरे को लगता है जैसे इन्होंने ये सवाल पूछा, ये सवाल कभी आता नहीं है क्लासरूम में. आई थिंक आई स्पीक इन इंग्लिश बिकॉज देयर आर स्टूडेंट्स हु आर फ्रॉम साउथ इंडिया, दे मे नॉट अंडरस्टैंड. Like Gupshup is also a Punjabi word, but the idea is to kind of upscale it to something, if we can upscale words like alienation to concepts or anomy to concept, or all those words that are regularly used in French and German as Gupshup, they become concepts for us, habitus and all those things. We struggle hard, spend like 3 years before we are sure that this is what this term means, and still we are unsure because one German will say, no, this is not the original meaning of this word. The original meaning comes from that particular region of Germany and stuff like that, right? So I think we always avoid, and I think Shrideep has left, we tend to kind of, and this has been a tragedy of social sciences in India. I'm actually responding to your question, that we are The starting point of doing academics is to alienate yourself from your context. Right? That you are now becoming scholar, that means you are kind of trying to engineer the color of your skin. You have to become like a white man. And yesterday we were talking about self and the other. We are taught right in the beginning in methodology courses that what is the difference between studying self and studying the other. What do you mean by self and the other? Who was the other? Who is the self? I have myself as a human being, I have my other self wherever I am in the world. Why do you think a black person in Zimbabwe and I have nothing in common? That person also feels pain when he gets hit. She also feels humiliated when she gets raped. Right? So what is the difference? Right? Yes, we speak different languages. We also speak very different languages. My wife and I are also very different. My children and I are also very different. So what makes us other and what makes us self? So I think this is a structure of hierarchy which is superimposed on us through social sciences. So when we do social sciences, the starting point is that you should have nothing of yourself in it. Objectivity. Yes, objectivity should be there. Objectivity as a value, you should be able to see things as they are. But objectivity does not mean that we should turn our genetic structure into the genetic structure of a white man, because only white man can see how things are, right? So they have their culture, and that culture is not very incomprehensible. There could be some codes here and there. Otherwise, they also laugh, they also cry, they also feel ashamed, they also feel humiliated, they also feel insulted. We also have language like citizenship. It makes perfect sense to us. Democracy makes perfect sense to us. Dignity makes perfect sense to us. Gender makes perfect sense to us. Right? Can't it be translated? So I think the idea of Gupshup is also to very self-consciously decolonize our modes of talking about ourselves. Right? And the question that Aparna is asking, in some sense, is very central to the idea of how one de-alienates ourselves from our practice. Right? Writing is very, very critical. I completely agree with Srideep, because not writing is also escaping the other. The other means the person who is going to read you and who is going to engage with you, not other in the sense I was talking about self and the other. So the entire discipline of anthropology, ethnography is based on, and this is something that again has come to us from within Indian sociology also. M.N. Srinivas writes on self and the other, right? I think Srinivas, when he does field work and he is writing about it, in the village, everyone sees him as Brahmin and they treat him as Brahmin, and Srinivas does not go to the Harijan Cheri to study Dalits because he is already designated as Brahmin. Now who is the self and who is the other, right? And then he is saying that he is an anthropologist trained in Oxford and he has come to study this village as an outsider. Who is an outsider and who is an insider, right? So these are very obvious questions, and we just take them for granted as if, it would not, I mean, that is the standard methodology practice. I can never understand what Aparna Vaidik is. As a woman, she's grown up very differently from me, right? So obviously, everyone has a context, and that context makes that person, and it also reflects on his or her scholarship. Yes, at some level, my date of birth is written in records 14th of November, right? And you know what is 14th of November? Yeah, so Chacha Nehru's birthday. So I was born in 60s, but not on 14th of November, right? I was born in early 60s, not exactly in the year as it was mentioned. My age is written slightly more, right? So that also reflects the context. So partition, being refugee, growing up in a family which is still struggling. So all that at some level is shaping our identities in a variety of ways. So my parents choose Chacha Nehru's birthday for my birthday, right? So there is a kind of reference point. There is a kind of, despite having lost everything because of partition, partition was not something that could not have been avoided. There were no nation states before that, right? So, and they were saved, my family was saved by a Muslim family, right? And that Muslim family put everything to risk in order to save my family. And only when they realized that now it would be difficult, they would, even if they tried to save, they would themselves get killed, but after that we will also get killed. My parents and grandparents would also get killed. So when they realized that this was impossible, they requested them, and they made sure that they were outside the risk zone. From within their own kind of personal family networks, they tried to kind of save our immediate family. There were lots of others who were killed. My grandfather, maternal grandfather, my mother's father was killed in partition, right? And they didn't even have time to mourn his death because they just had to save themselves. And that trauma continues. It's not like it's gone away. I was not there. And I did not suffer. My parents were very, very hardworking people, and they made sure that all of us studied, right? Actually, my 3 brothers, my sister did not study as much, but my brothers studied much better than me. They were much better. They went into sciences. One became engineer, 2 became doctors. I was the one who was considered kind of laid back, and I came to arts, and then I eventually came to sociology, which is another story which I told yesterday. But that pain at some level, pain is perhaps a wrong word, but when I listen to people speaking in Punjabi, the kind of Punjabi that is spoken at my home, which is very different from the standardized Punjabi which is spoken in Punjab today, in the Indian Punjab today, I find a longing, right? I feel like going there. I sometimes cry when I am listening to those people talking about Punjabi, right? So there is obviously something that, and that's what makes us sociologists. That's something that defines our, what we call as sociality, right? So when I have to talk about my sociality, on the one hand, 14th of November connects me with the Indian nation state and with the Indian state power, right? I do sociology because sociology at that time was also seen as a social science discipline which is directly contributing to nation building. And we were passionate. What was significant about JNU? JNU is a very nationalist institution. From day one, it has always been an institution that is dedicated to nation building, even though we have had this moment in JNU's life when we were all kind of seen as anti-nationals, as a separate thing. But there is a moment, and I think if one was to write history of social sciences, I'm slightly kind of giving answer to your question in a slightly more kind of professional manner. There is this moment when all of us were contributing to nation building. I mean, that's how social sciences in India became significant. I mean, village studies, we've been talking about, village studies were to be done for the planning commission so that economists could get to know about how India has lived in the past, right? And I've critiqued that how this idea of India, which is centered around village, was also very problematic and very Orientalist. But anyway, the sociology that I grew up with was sociology of development. And I also taught that course in sociology of development, right? So that project has kind of gone. Now nobody in the state wants to listen to us because developmental state itself has kind of, locked itself up or opened the locks and run away. So that state does not exist. So where do we go? The second purpose for doing sociology is collegial recognition, that we write for other colleagues and seek their appreciation, make our careers, right? Yes, all of us do that. All of us are aspiring, stars or whatever, middle class, and in order to do that, you want to become a professor and, you want to be recognized. So all that is a standard narrative. But at the same time, I think when I teach in my class, remember, I used to give this term paper to my students and I would ask them to write in a language which you would not hesitate giving your granddaughter to read and to make sure that she is able to make sense of it. So that is conversational practices, and I think Ravi was talking about it in some sense. Rukmani was also talking about it, walking on the street. So we are all the time living in society, and sociology cannot be diverse to it. So how do we decolonize that kind of academic life and bring it to everyday life? And I think learn from that, and also in conversation also teach something there. something, exchange that yes, this is an experience which happened in South Africa and maybe it is relevant to this village in Rajasthan. So I think that's where we can contribute. People living in Rajasthan also have their own perspective, have their own vision that this is what happened to my grandfather and how can you say this to me? So that conversational practice would also help us decolonize sociology and also de-elitize us, not taking ourselves so seriously. So whenever you go to seminar, you're going to give a paper, right? That itself alienates you from your audience, right? I'm sure Sneha is sitting here and she'll say I'm talking too much. So I'll stop for the time being. Let me know if you want me to come to practice a specific point.
Yes, you can hold on to this.
Okay.
Yes, so let's take it further. And I would like to ask you that, what's your early experience in rural Punjab and Patiala, how shaped your research in agrarian change and caste relations? So we would like to ask you that, if you can reflect.
I was born in Punjab, that Punjab which later became Haryana. Right? So Haryana and Punjab are not the same thing, they are different. My sociology journey began in Pune in 1980s. Again, I am digressing from your direct question, but that's very critical. In 1980s, I went to Pune University in 1983, and this was also the time when Punjab was having Khalistan movement. It was kind of terrorist movement, and the question of Sikh identity came up. I didn't want to go to a village. I didn't want to do village studies. I've seen villages, and it's not like one cannot comment on it. I wanted to study identity. And identity was not a word. That's why community and identities, I kind of later on also published a book, organized a conference in Hyderabad University. So identity was not something that in 1980s anybody talked about. And when it was talked about, it was kind of seen as somebody who is trying to divide the working class. And therefore you are reactionary, you're not really talking about class, you're not talking about politics, you're not talking about revolution. And when I started my PhD in Chandigarh, everyone said, you're mad, you want to study identity, you'll get killed. You can't work on Sikh identity without listening to what the militants are trying to say, either way you're stuck. I didn't know what to do, so I was asked to study something which was more fashionable, and the fashionable thing at that time was Green Revolution and aspects of Green Revolution, and somebody suggested me, why don't you study these banks are trying to give credit to poor people. I didn't like it, I found it very boring and bureaucratic. So I turned it around and I started working on net dependencies. So yes, so one starts with the text, right? And then before you go to the field, as a sociologist, I think one is already given a perspective on what the field is like. So I think there is a connection and disconnection between the village and the notions of the village. And my problem started with there. So the notion of village as a system of Jajmani relations, as agrarian structure, having a particular kind of system, and I think that's where the value of fieldwork lies. And the moment I went there to the field, I thought all these notions were just notions coming from the left, when there was this thesis called semi-feudal mode of production, which was very popular in JNU. And on the other side, you have people like I mentioned in Nivas who are talking about Jajmani system, caste, and etc., etc. I found both of them being quite meaningless. So the village was, and now when I talk about the village, I think it's also very difficult to not reflect on what I saw first through the imagination that you have now of the village, right? So I think it's difficult to just present what I saw in 1960s when I was growing up, or 1970s, or even my first encounter as field worker, because those categories keep changing, right? The village changes, we also change. It's not only that we are revisiting, there's economists have this strange notion of revisits, that you can go to the village as if economist is the same person. Discipline change, disciplines, categories change, disciplines, questions change. So village was village, village is still village, it's not like village is not there. So my focus was directly to look at class question, land question. I was not socialized into looking at caste. So for me, village was divided village, but it was mainly divided on the basis of landowners and not landowners. But there were many others. There were shopkeepers, there were people who lived in the village, they are neither agricultural laborers, nor were they farmers. In this village, he also had refugees, Punjabis who were living there. They did all kinds of odd things because they didn't own land and they didn't have, they didn't work as agricultural laborer because that is not the work. Some of them did. Some of them were attached laborers. Some of them perhaps, worked as tenants outside. So there's a kind of, lot of variety. So village was a complex place and it was very actively connected. I mean, I remember even my childhood, my grandfather and his younger brother, they would pick up their transistor. Those days you could connect transistor to Lahore radio. So they would live their Pakistan life through their radio, and the radio will connect at 5 o'clock in the evening. And after that there would be news coming from Lahore for several hours. And that was the time when they were most happy, right?
Yeah, so the sense one is getting is that disciplinary shifts happen, but also self also shifts, no? In one's youth, what you would look at may not be the things that appeal to you, or those categories may not appeal to you with academic experience and also life experience. So I want to just bring in that phase of Pune back and tie it in with the question I want to ask. So I know from my conversations with you that the 1984 anti-Sikh riots in Delhi were something that bypassed you, in the sense you were not in Delhi. And that experience, which is sort of central to the memory of most Delhiites, especially the Sikh community, is not a shared sort of memory for you in terms of lived experience. So, and many times I've thought about this, and we've had conversations of religion. You're wearing a turban, you're being a Sikh scholar, and what does that do for your sociology, this idea of religion? And I really wanted to ask this because especially in JNU, we don't attend to this question in a way. So, say what you feel comfortable about, in this.
Two things. One is when I came to JNU, and also when I'm doing sociology, there is a lot of effort to put you in that prison, that since I am a Sikh, so I must be a scholar of Punjab, doing Sikh studies, so there is a lot of space, lot of audience, and I would have perhaps been much more acceptable if I was doing that niche area that I am a Sikh, and there are very few scholars who study Sikhism in India. So I study Punjab, I study Sikhism, and still kind of identified with Punjab, though again, as I said, I didn't grow up in Punjab. So that is one point, that it was critical for me to stay in the mainstream, and considering what was happening yesterday and today, I think I was successful. Until now I was not convinced, but yesterday I was convinced. When you hear again and again, of something people are saying nice things about you, it feels good, right? So second, I didn't escape 1984, right? And given that many of you are students doing MA, I was writing an exam. And that was around these days, early November. I was writing my exam in Pune University, and as I was telling yesterday, I was a very bright, not bright is a wrong word, but I was a very hard-working student. And while I'm writing exam, somebody came to say something to me, that there is somebody from the Vice Chancellor's office, there is a message for you. I didn't take it very seriously. I thought, there must be something that they are nominating me, or there is some medal that they are recommending me for. I was very happy about it. I said, let me finish my exam and I'll come. But as soon as you finish your exam, please go to the Vice Chancellor's office. So I finished my exam and I kind of walked down to VC's office, and somebody saw me there. They said, please come and sit here. And then they sent me to, I think, Registrar's office. Vice Chancellor got busy with something else. And Registrar tells me that this has happened. Mrs. Gandhi has been shot at, and most likely she's been killed, and it has been done by 2 Sikh bodyguards, and we are worried that you live in hostel here, somebody might attack you. I kind of immediately realized what was happening and what could happen. So they said, "Do you have any family here?" I said, "I don't have." He said, "Think about it. If you can't, then let us know. We will make some arrangement." And you can't trust Indian bureaucracy or Indian. So then I thought, I have to do something. I knew one teacher who was from, her husband was in military, so I thought maybe I'll contact her. But before that, this friend of mine who was also my classmate, he was walking towards me and he was also worried or anxious. And he asked me, what happened? So his name was Jose. He was a father, he was a Christian missionary who was there to study, do MA, or he was perhaps brother at that time. So I told him and I straight away asked, "Can I come with you?" And he lived in Loyola Church, which is next to Loyola School, close to Pune University. So I went with him and he said, "Look, I can take you along, but I am also a guest here. This is not I'll have to talk to the authorities here before I can say anything." I said, "Chalo, abhi to chalo." So after some time he came back, after putting me in his room or some other room, he says, "You can stay here." So I stayed there and it was non-stop audience. One was hearing about what is happening in Delhi in one way or the other, rumors, everything was reaching me, right? But I was taken care of very well. I mean, I don't remember having been fed such good food for so long ever. It was a very nice place, very, very welcoming place. And I remember some friends of mine, classmates, came to see me. They knew that I was staying there. And finally, when things settled down, I remember I thought, now I can go back to the hostel. And while I was going back, and somebody shouted at me, "Arey, mar jaoge, andar jao, bahar ghum rahe ho." And then obviously, when one came to Delhi on the way, there was a lot of hostility. It wasn't easy, right? It's not something that... So I also didn't run away from it. I remember publishing 2 papers in EPW on what happened to Sikh studies with the Khalistan movement. And that's something that I've been, in some sense, commenting on here and there. I've written several pieces in seminar on Punjab and on that crisis. So I have, at some level, some body of scholarship around that politics. I also wrote an essay on communities and regions, or regions and communities. And this is something that I want to go back to. Why Punjab, Punjabiyat and stuff like that. This is something that I'm kind of hoping to do something now that I've established myself in the mainstream, I can go to the periphery.
In JNU, I remember as a student, this is back in 90s, one didn't wear visible markers of one's religion. And if one did, it was like mentioned or frowned upon. Very few, you're a turban scholar. I wanted you to say something about that. What does religion do for you? Because you're carrying your religion with you. And we expected social sciences to be a secular space somehow. But in you, it's coming together in a way. So if you would just speak a little bit about that before we go on to the next question.
To be honest, that's a very central political and academic question for me, which I think should not be stated. Because, again, that it is JNU. Left wing the conventional left wing is as sectarian as the conventional right wing is on question of religion. Right? Not wearing markers is also elitism. That you can afford to do that. And then you condescendingly look at people who wear those markers, that these are still people who are living with orthodoxy, they are incapable of being modern, they are incapable of thinking of revolution, thinking of a better life, they are stuck in tradition, they are stuck in their cultures. And I think that is biggest elitism, that is biggest kind of classism, and that is as oppressing and as oppressive as as anything else is, perhaps sometimes more, because at personal level that message is given to you. And I have received that message, and I've always kind of, like this, the oily skin, I have not let it touch me. And I do it very self-consciously. I am not actually a very religious person as such, right? And it was part of my politics, and I say it now very actively, because every time people ask me to speak on minorities, and I say this in public platforms like this, but also in Sikh religious groups, Sikh forum, wherever I speak, that this word minority is an abuse. Nobody is minority in India. When it comes to Indian public sphere, we are all citizens. That is what is written in the Constitution, right? And that resonates the philosophy of my religion. Ek Onkar, the world is one. All of us are. That's what I started with, question of self. My self is everywhere. My self is in everything. And actually, in my religious philosophy, which I don't know much about, I kind of should not comment on it, but whatever I learn, myself is also there in tree. Myself is also there in nature. And that's what kind of, Nanak's kind of very clear that Pavan Guru Pani Pita, right? It's not something that they are not saying. That myself is everywhere. And then, social sciences, the way they come to us through colonialism, including the left-wing politics comes to us through colonialism and through similar kind of ideologies of being secular, rational, modern as the central, right? And I actually say, I remember when I go to public platform, even when Muslim religious group invite me, I've made this statement publicly that, minorities status was a kind of ploy of the Muslim elite after independence. And they are also responsible for the production of Hindu majority. There is no majority in India. There can't be any majority. In a democratic country, we have a constitutional democracy. In constitutional democracy, we are all equal. We are all one. We are all citizens. And that's where I think Mamdani's politics, I can identify with it completely. And that's where we need to stand. And Mamdani was told by some old Muslim person that you are contesting election, but be careful. Don't publicly let anyone know that you are a Muslim. And he insisted on publicly saying that, yes, I am a Muslim. I am a South Asian. I am a man. I have a gender. I can't hide my gender. I can't hide my skin color. The point is that if you are a citizen, you need to foreground that identity when you are doing politics, not the identity of your faith, which is your own identity. Everyone has different identity. Women can't look like men. Black person can't look like white person. There will be tall people, there will be short people. Right? If we begin to identify ourselves through ascription in the public sphere, that's why ascription is very critical. We need to confront ascription in order to destroy ascription. We need to talk about caste in order to liquidate caste, in order to annihilate caste, as Ambedkar said. Not to produce caste identity and then protect those caste identities. And that reflects in my work.
Yes, so this is, I think, to relate it to that, what you have said, let's extend it. You have often reflected on politics of knowledge and academic hierarchies, like exactly what you're talking. Can you a little bit more, how has your own social and biographic locations shaped your scholarly concern? Particularly, I'm interested on your focus on inequality, exclusion, and the need to diversify sociological perspectives, and we would like to hear a little more. Because
thank you very much for asking that question, because my own position is again slightly kind of, lots of people will say, see, I told you this. I think this location thing is overstated. If you are a woman, only then you can do feminism. I think doing social science means doing critical studies. At some level, it's a professional calling, right? So you socialize yourself to do something else. Right? Yes, all of us come with our identities, and identities also give us resources, produce constraints. But the idea of doing social sciences is, when I'm teaching in the classroom, I can't just say that, this is where I come from. Right? If you are a woman, and if you have to teach Durkheim, you need to teach Durkheim as Durkheim is, not as you read Durkheim as a feminist, or read Parsons. You can critique Parsons, because feminists have critiqued Parsons, I think we should do that. But as a critical scholar, my position would be to recognize location as a relevant reality, but not reduce my scholarship to locationalism. And I think that's what has happened, that everything is reduced to locationalism. It's only Rukmini who can do feminist scholarship. It's only Surinder Jodhka who can do study on Sikhism. It's only an SC scholar who can work on Dalits, and an SC scholar will work only on Dalits, not on privilege or even on Muslims. I mean, why should we be? Then we are not doing social sciences, right? Not that these things don't matter. If I am a woman, there are lots of things I can't do. I am a man. If I want to work on gender, there will be a problem, right? If I go to a village and I want to study kind of intimate relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, I can't access that. I know I should recognize that limitation. But that doesn't mean that I should not even have a question on that, right? That doesn't mean that, I can't collaborate with somebody who is a PhD scholar or who is another colleague to actually talk about it, because that also implies she's my mother and my wife, right? So it's not like she's another world, right? She's also within me, and I am also within her. They invariably fight about the attention of the man in the family, or maybe other things. So we need to also have theories which are theories of society, rather than locationally determined perspectives, and then we are left with nothing. That makes social sciences, in some sense, impossible and perhaps also irrelevant. So yes, location is very critical. So I try to place myself outside caste system, right? Because again, I use my strategic position as a Sikh and say that I am not a Dalit, I am not a Brahmin, I am not a Hindu. So I observe caste, I observe reality of caste, but I observe it from a political perspective, as a citizen, from the perspective of citizenship. That means I look at caste as humiliation. If it is humiliation, then obviously it is humiliation of a certain order. So if you are in a ruling establishment kind of caste, if you are a Jat in UP or Haryana, or you are a Brahmin in Patna, so these are locations which would be locations of domination, right? So, or man and women. So I think, but at the same time, as a social scientist, I need to have questions which are social science questions, which we should learn from each other. It's not like, I would have final word, but social science are meant to be open. That's why Gupshup. Don't take it so seriously. You have your own notions, dialogical, trying to kind of, figure out the way world is. But at the same time, the person you're talking to, he might have not read anything that you have read, but she would give you an insight which I have taken those insights from lots of people, and they have become part of my scholarship.
Thank you for saying that, because I think it's dissolved something for me also, because one is always coming up against this thing of location now, and one having to clarify and state it before you state your scholarship, and how we can rethink this idea of location also as something like context from which we come from, but also getting professionalized in certain, and those are also locations. So somewhat a little inside-outside thing. And so I always used to think, where are we asking the question from? And often, like the older scholarship would ask the question from the outside. Bahar khade hoke phir aap analyze kar rahe ho. I'm outside the problem. But what you responded allows us to be inside and outside at the same time, and that gives a wholly different perspective. Yeah, so thank you for that answer. I think you had more questions, huh? Yeah, sure.
So yeah, let us continue with that. So what amazes me about the fluidity, I mean, you move from rural transformation to caste, and then also elite and middle class. So I would like to little bit you to reflect on how this fluidity and moving from different domains of sociological knowledge, how you navigated it, and what actually how we make sense of it in more common beyond the sociological writing.
maybe I need to think about it a little more, because this is something that perhaps one should reflect a little later. See, as I said earlier, I mean, when farmers' movement happened, I was invited to speak. It was on pandemic time. I spoke on many platforms and I published many newspaper articles online, and also there was a paper in Journal of Peasant Studies. There were 2-3 other papers that I published. And many people thought that since I'm from Punjab, I'm a Sikh, I must also be son of a farmer, right? So I would have authentic view. And very often I also got my way because others obviously thought I had authentic view. My father was not a farmer. My grandfather was not a farmer. We did have some agricultural land, but which was sold off long time back. I have never done any kind of farming, right? I don't have anyone now in immediate family who is a proper farmer, right? Likewise, I told you my location outside caste, middle class, privileged, elite. So at some level, I have been, at some level, you know, as I said, my target was to remain in the mainstream. And I have been, you know, quote unquote, prolific and hard-working, quote unquote. I was been systematically working in some areas and they've come together, and now there is, as people were saying, body of literature. But that was also a kind of career choice. That was very clearly that these are things that are required. When I was invited to write this short introduction to caste, I was very happy. I had done some work on caste, and I worked hard and I kind of produced a book in time, and they were very happy. And then I proposed something else. Somebody approached us, I think some German foundation, can you do a paper on the Indian middle class? I contacted Asim Prakash, I thought we'll do together. He was doing some work on middle class. And then this thing was going on, Dalit millionaires. I got into it, I thought this is interesting, this is new. I want to do this work, and somebody funded it. And that paper came out. You know, this was the first paper yesterday Dipankar Gupta was talking about. My perspective was not what Dipankar was saying. But all said and done, it opened up a new window for me. And then we had this big project, and Mr. Thorat invited me to work with him on Dalit question, and we did that volume on block by caste. These were all new areas which we opened up. My paper on corporate hiring was published in 2007. It was in collaboration with Princeton University. And 2007, this was the first paper of its kind on corporate hiring, right? Now there is plenty of literature. People are talking about caste in the urban context, caste in corporate. My work on Dalit entrepreneurship, it was the first of its kind. Later on, people started working on Dalit capital, and that was again a friend of mine, Asim, and many other people wrote on it positively and negatively, right? So I was the first one to do this empirical work. So I was also picking up topics which I thought would have market, which would make me visible. It was not simply a kind of, I was not driven by a social movement or a political movement necessarily. So I was not, in classroom also I said, if you want to be a social scientist, keep your politics, but keep your ideology out, right? So you can't do social sciences. So I was kind of following broadly, what I thought would be fashionable after some time. I was one of those who kind of got into this area. My work on caste also was, as I said, of very different kind, different from the way it was done. Yesterday we were talking about, separating village from agriculture and talking about agriculture very differently, editing Review of Rural Affairs issue this time also for EPW. And I was writing this introduction. There again I state that agriculture historically has never been limited to the village. Agriculture has also been always a part of the urban, and it has made urban possible, right? You can't think of urban without thinking about food. You can't think of urban without thinking about land revenue, historically speaking. So urban is embedded in agrarian economy, right? And then people couple agriculture and rural together. You have worked on religiosity and the kind of sociality. Satendra work on sociality, changing rural sociality is again a pioneering work. And I think when I go to the village now, and there are different ways in which, and we never thought either functionalists will talk about religion or some odd people will talk about religion. If you want to do hardcore work, you should only talk about class. And those people who talked about class never went to the village. And some of them were very distinguished scholars here, and they carried out debates without making one reference to the local realities of caste and the manner in which people also sit together in temple or they don't go to temple. These are real issues that concern rural life, rural sociality. Not very different from urban sociality, right? We were talking about Pada yesterday. It's very, very similar to rural life in many ways. That's what Anushwa was also telling us yesterday.
Sorry, we were just consulting. So we were just consulting what to do. So, as I'm hearing you, like you asked the question about fluidity, and what it appears is a more like adventurous spirit, ability to risk take when it comes to ideas. Right? And I'm connecting that back also to the life of a family who's come into India as a refugee. What you have are your own resources to rely on. A little bit, okay, you will get some welfare, something from the state. But ultimately, it's what you rely on, your ability to push on and move on. So this kind of can do hard work, and through that I can produce scholarship and I take risks, new ideas. So I think that's what's really coming through in the way you're talking, describing your journey with new ideas. And it's also interesting about ideology and how that once your work starts getting inflected by that. But then again, if we were to keep ideology aside, I think what we can replace that by is a sense of ethics and morality. I think that's also not talked about enough in academia. At least as historians, we never talk to our grad students about the ethics of research. There's never ever a course on that. At least like when you teach ethnography, one does the ethics of interviewing and all that. So I think that word would be more valuable to describe what you're saying once you leave ideology out, because I think for many people, ideology is what is moral for them. It is what grounds them as human beings and makes them agential. Right? So when you're asking students to leave ideology out, it is not to leave out that agential moral part of yourselves. It's to bring in the ethical without it being dogmatic. Yeah,
So I think this is very important because this is part of my work. When I talk about it, I also locate social sciences being embedded in politics of modernity. Modernity, one can say, is also ideological. It has a kind of, historical responsibility of producing citizenship. Everyone is equal, democracy and stuff like that. That's why we have sociology. Sociology is not a neutral enterprise. We make distinction between objectivity and neutrality. We are not neutral. I said, keep your politics, but keep your ideology out. So what you are saying, ethics, as social scientists or as historians or anthropologists or sociologists, we are training ourselves for a professional work. Like doctors would do professional work. Right? In order to be a doctor, you're saving life. You're immediately moral and ethical. You can't kill a person, you can't help a person even die. That is also illegal. So there is an oath that you have to take that as a medical practitioner, but you can do medical practitioner only if you are professionally trained to do medicine. Right? You know how much dose of antibiotics you have to give. Antibiotics can kill you, or any other thing can kill you. People are using all kinds of things these days. There are what is called this atomic energy, the nuclear. There is something called nuclear medicine, right? So very small part of it, if you can induce it, might kill cancer cells. Right? So I think that's where professionalism is required, but no professionalism is outside the sphere of human ethics. And that's where it is a generic politics. The moment we come to ideology, it becomes sectarian politics, I think. Like for example, if I wear a turban, I also have a Sikh ideology. But in classroom, if I am kind of looking at a Sikh student vis-a-vis a Hindu student or Muslim student on the basis of their religious identity, it might still influence me, but that would be unethical. That is not acceptable. That's where my professionalism becomes very critical. That's what I say, that we need to say what we see. And that's where empirical work becomes very important. I remember we were talking, Vamsi, we were reading his, and he was telling about a kind of interview they had of a candidate who had applied for position in their university, and this chap comes up with a model, and then that model is presented, and after that he analyzes data. And then they say, but your data doesn't match with the model. And he says, so data is wrong. So I reject this data set. So I think that's where I think as researchers, we need to research, but you can't research without a question. And your questions are always political questions. That is a classical Weberian position. So our questions are value questions. They are political questions, they are not outside politics. But once those questions have been framed, then your engagement with the empirical has to be objective. Again, it is not neutral, right? If something is killing people, if your observation, if your interviews are creating mental illness, you can't ask them. So that the ethical questions are very critical.
Professor Jodhka, I mean, what I learned, and I think what everybody amazes by your work is that, and what makes you doyen of sociology is that the entrepreneurship. I mean, hunger for new ideas. That's what I learned, while reading you and following you and your work. And if we take it further, and I ask you, looking back to more than the 3 decades of research, teaching and public engagement, how do you understand the evolution of your own intellectual commitments? What role have personal experience within and beyond the university played in shaping the questions you ask and the arguments you make? If you could reflect on it.
So, there are 2-3 things which I can immediately identify. Again, these are questions that I should reflect when I'm 80 years old and I'm thinking of writing my last book. Yeah? 90, whatever, yeah, I don't know whether. So maybe 80 is safer. First was this battle with ideologies. That was right, in your own house. So how do you deal with them? And coming to terms with both, kind of cultural context as well as the dominant political context at that time was Marxist communist ideology. And social sciences have a very clear history of being on the left of the center, which it remains, I think, globally. That's why the right wing doesn't like social sciences. Social sciences historically have been on the left of the center. The questions have come from left of the center. I said that social sciences are pursuing politics of modernity. And modernity is not a Western category. Modernity might have originated there, but it's a global human category, right? That's why I don't believe in West and East. And that is my second challenge. How do you deal with this burden of the white man? This burden of the white man is simultaneously a gendered burden, is simultaneously a regional burden, is simultaneously a kind of burden of scholarship traditions, that unless something has come from American university or European university, we don't treat it as valid knowledge. Yesterday I was mentioning that Pierre Bourdieu does field work, Michel Foucault writes about French history, they are doing theoretical work. We are doing field work with profound conceptual engagement. We are doing empirical work in Punjab or Western UP or Rajasthan, right? So I think that is the political hierarchy of the way in which university academy is structured today. I have been to the West and I've kind of, it's very tempting to be there because, or it was very tempting to be there, not any longer perhaps, right? So both those were very good institutions. But then those institutions also have judgment of us, that this is all we can do. That's why I like JNU. I was happy staying in JNU. Staying here, I confront Western scholarship. I have collaborated with Western scholars. I think we should collaborate with all kinds of scholars. But at the same time, we can also provide leadership. We can also produce concepts. And we can study inequalities in Germany using the framework of caste hierarchy, ascription-based hierarchies as I do, right? And I've been kind of not very successful, But there are scholars, mainstream scholars in US, in Europe, who have been kind of tempted to use my category. Some of them have also used it. So like Louis Wacan or Boyke Reben, some others also. So they have actually, it's possible to not just make them take our work seriously on our society, but also do work on their society using language which we are trying to invent through comparative work. And I think your generation, younger generation of scholars who are growing up here, we are in a position, in a much better position, because we have been on the margin, to produce categories through which the world should be understood. And as I said, politics of social sciences is producing citizenship. If that is the politics, it's only the person who is lacking citizenship. That's why feminism could have come only from women's scholarship. And that has given a lot to social sciences. It has opened our eyes to many, many questions which social sciences were blind to. You look at village studies, they're talking about patriarchy as if, there's nothing wrong with it. That's a natural social fact. It's a natural way of organizing family life because it is required, otherwise children will not grow up well. Right? So that is functionalism, right? So feminists came and gave us a vision which was hard to ignore by anyone. So I think that's where I think we are in a position of privilege to produce categories for comparative studies of inequalities globally.
So thank you so much, Surinder, for because I was sitting here and I was, reminded, sometimes I would go to him and I say, "Ab PhD student aur nahi lungi." It's very tiring. He said, "Why will you not teach more? Why will you not have more PhD students?" Yeah, this is what makes, life. It's like, okay. Next round I will take one more. So I've ended up with far too many that I, they suck up all my time. So, but what I'm thinking, as you're saying, is about that caste order in academic world, where we become, speaking as a historian, because many times I'm telling students that what you're doing, you're turning into a case study. Theory is coming from the West, and what we are doing is using Foucault, and then you say, okay, surveillance is not possible, or surveillance is to be, it's a surveillance state, uska theory liya, hamara data liya, or that's what. So what we're getting, lots of us are getting reduced to case studies. But can there be alternate forms of conceptualization? Categories that are generated from here, and I think for history it has been subaltern studies, honestly, which was again a creation of multi-sided creation, scholars in Australia, England and India, but I see it as a South Asian contribution, Indian contribution to historical methods. So subaltern studies did shake up the field like that, where Western scholars began to very actively start engaging with the idea of the subaltern or whatever, margin, agentiality, negotiation and all that. So I think there was a period in history writing where everybody was just looking at all this material, and that was the impact of subaltern studies. Although at JNU, while I was a student, we were critiquing it. Okay, so having said that, it's not like I'm saying a laudatory history of subaltern studies, but I think that's what Professor Jodhka's work does. It's trying to push against, in working on caste, he's also pushing against the international caste order, so to say. Of the way we think, the kind of categories we work with, what social sciences means, what research means and how it is done. So the very practice of social science in the way he has proposed through his own practice, I think pushes against that. And on this laudatory note, shall we close the session? So thanks a lot. Thank you for your responses.